everybody and welcome to Amphlett Reviews, back with another deep dive into some Japanese cinema with Shinobi Part 3 Resurrection, released in 1963, directed by Kazuo Mori, who's done quite a few Japanese films in his kind of tenure. The only one I've seen previously to this one was the Rafu Daimajin, which is the second entry in that trilogy, which I quite enjoyed and quite a fun trilogy of films based on the mythic kind of god character in kind of samurai time. He has done a few of the films which have recently got released from Arrow Video in terms of A Certain Killer, I believe, which is quite exciting if you're a fan of that director and seeing more of his films recently getting new restorations, getting releases by not just Radiance, but also by Arrow Video as well. So quite a few of his films are starting to see the light of day and get more access to his films. And he's also done a few of those Zatoichi films on that big Criterion box set as well. So definitely a very utilized and very versed director that is known to be in the space of samurai-based films for the 60s, going into the 70s as well. So definitely a very established director taking over the duties from Yamamoto, which did the first two movies, which he departed after agreeing to do a sequel entry, a follow-up, based on the original novelizations, and then wanted to leave it there because the character that we were exploring in those first two movies essentially were a minor role within the novelization. I wanted to stay true to form and was asked to do a third movie due to the end of the events of the second film, which I'll get into in a moment. He denied and moved on to the projects, and they got a new director involved and continued the story through ninja hijinks and bullshittery in some degree, but kind of does work to what the film is trying to go for, and expanding upon this character even further, which I would imagine they would do even more of these films within the later entries, being the fact there are 9 films in total. I think the last couple is new actors, maybe different kind of, side stories, being the fact that the main actor did pass away very young due to cancer at age 37, which is absolutely horrible. Raizô Ichikawa is the main actor in all 3 of these films and most of the series in this ninja franchise, and he's gone to do he did go on to do Sleepy Hours of Death, which is another epic series he did, a different kind of character compared to this one, and many other kind of side projects and other films that are slowly getting released now by various kind of distributions. And I know it's definitely become a bit of a hot topic recently. And it's interesting, and it's one of the things I always kind of find fascinating when we get into a specific year, a certain kind of company or companies start finding more of these kind of older films and doing restorations, doing new extras, appreciations, and bringing them to the limelight. And it's very spoiling for the UK and the US, or the Western side, to kind of see more of these films and the artists, whether it's directors or kind of performers, and get a chance to see their work decades later. And, I never heard of this actor before, and I know more about him now recently due to kind of diving into this series, uncovering more of his films, and definitely a few that I definitely want to check out when they are available or when there can be, more of a easier access to get a hold of. And it's a real shame that this actor did die very early in his kind of career in terms of being age 37, as mentioned. And, I like the fact there is a kind of a extra on the edition which talks about his life, his early beginnings and his death, like a 40-minute extra on the Radiance edition, which is really good, really informative, really well put together, and just talks about his upbringing and his kind of, continuously wanting to work despite having cancer. And I like the fact, leading into the film itself and the later entries that I'm sure that I'm going to be exploring, he was a very, very in a dark place. He was in a very angry, dark place, and his performance definitely kind of utilized that for sure in terms of how he postured himself, how he used makeup, how he kind of did his expressions. And they said some of his best performances when he was standing still, not saying anything, and his face would say everything. He still wanted to pursue and continue moving forward with his kind of acting. And even though he couldn't do the action stuff later on in his kind of before his death, he would still give these really amazing performances. And that kind of darkness, that kind of, a real kind of bad place in his mind, he channeled that within his characters. And one of the things I really appreciate within that little extra actually is the fact that he played non-traditional hero types. He wasn't a character that was about being righteous or doing the right thing. He was almost a semi-anti-hero kind of character, as these movies, especially with these Shinobi films, getting darker and darker, which I'll get into in a moment, definitely becoming a much more of a you know, a nastier, kind of more brutal character, showing less compassion, not doing things for the right reasons, but doing it purely for vengeance, for kind of anger and wanting people to suffer, and doing things and saying things that a traditional hero wouldn't do, compared to some of the other Japanese kind of characters that we know and love from the Zatoichi series that would go on to do that type of stuff. And this would also translate to his role in Sleepy Eyes of Death, which would play much more of a asshole character from what my understanding of it is, which I look forward to diving into that potentially soon down the line. So yeah, very interesting kind of performer and actor. Nice to know a bit more about him in terms of his life and his upbringing, and how that translates into his performance going forward, you know, past these kind of 3 movies, which I think is interesting. Just before getting into the review itself, one of the things I do really appreciate on the Radiance edition is the kind of ninja kind of a little essay kind of thing, talking about the ninja craze and how ninjas were kind of explored within Japanese cinema from the 1921s all the way post-World War, which I think is quite interesting, how they're kind of shown and how these films show them in a very different way compared to the West, obviously being a lot more gimmicky, a lot more kind of, you know, having red and white kind of, you know, clothing, and having ninja on their head, and how this translates to later movies, and how they're kind of exploited and used within the Chuck Norris films, and Revenge of the Ninjas and things like that, Enter the Ninja's Den, and how Hong Kong cinema would use them, and just kind of shows what the mythical historical version of them were, how they were used in films, from Japanese films, you know, especially within this series, being a lot more darker, grounded, or more political, being the shadow kind of operatives, while everything else is going on in the background, versus the more kind of comedic, goofier side within the kind of the West, and how they were used. And even something like the James Bond film, Sean Connery, his character would go to Japan and become a ninja, and, you know, adapt to those kind of styles, and have the kind of clothing, and have those more gimmicky kind of aspects to the film, which I will watch that film again in much more of a different view next time I do watch it. And even then, even before I got into Japanese cinema, I always found that film quite questionable, and its kind of view, and how it kind of treated women, and how, you know, he kind of embedded himself into that kind of, you know, Japanese culture, and how much of an expert he became. It's kind of a strange film, but I'll get into that probably another time. So this is the concluding chapter of the trilogy, Resurrection, part of the Radiance box set, which is the first volume. As mentioned, there are 6 more movies. The last couple wouldn't involve the main actor, being the fact he did pass. So I look forward to kind of checking them out, see what they are, to see if they can add something to the series, whether they're worthy entries or whether they're just kind of add-ons, rehashes. I will explore them as they go along, and see what they have to offer. But a really great addition for Radiance. Definitely something you need to keep in mind in terms of watching these films, is they are political films, grounded movies that have really good action in moments. They are about the politics of the samurai versus the ninja, and with the kind of the historical aspects of the film as well. I like the fact the film does show certain events that did take place within the 1506 weather instance kind of thing, and historical value to your audience, while giving you an entertaining piece with ninjas infiltrating a kind of a clan, and having manipulation and death, and kind of, you know, planting seeds for mistrust. And so here we are at Shinobi Part 3, Resurrection, following our character Gomon, which at the end of the events of the second film was about to be executed by hot boiling pot, just like really heated, really nasty, kind of, you know, basically being boiled alive, essentially, setting on fire, boiling your insides out, and a really nasty kind of execution cliffhanger from the events of Part 2, which the original director came back, did this, and thought that was a very appropriate ending to that character, being the fact he wasn't in the novelizations, and definitely adds something interesting to the series in terms of the consequences and the idea of a ninja sacrificing himself. He couldn't get his revenge, and it ends on a very kind of bitter note, where maybe someone else could take over the reins from this character. Maybe a lesson to be learned, kind of in the consequences of you know, defying the kind of the powers that be. And despite the bullshittery a little bit, I don't mind actually the idea that kind of he basically you know, a bomb goes off, a smoke bomb goes off, and gets replaced by another person that we don't know who that person is, who is also going to be executed in the exact same way, and obviously gets thrown in and gets killed. And basically it's I think 10 days later, and the idea is that the chopped head is on display. People can go and kind of see it and amuse it, and you know, basically the current reign of the government, this kind of the samurai order, has been satisfied, and they have got rid of the ninja threat once and for all. And Gomont is alive and well, of course. He's hiding out, being assisted by Hanzo, which is the character that was in the second film, who basically is making a backwards kind of deal, a defector, essentially, from the position of power that's currently reigned at the moment. And basically him and his master basically made a deal with him. Essentially, we're going to help you out to infiltrate, to kind of do espionage, blackmail, steal, and do what you need to do best, essentially, and help facilitate your vengeance at the same time. Because as we know from the second film, his wife died in the battle, basically in a peaceful protest, and his son was thrown into fire by the man he was trying to kill in this film. So he is the current ruler, and he's had a massive series of promotions clearly since then, and he wants his revenge. And Gomon's character, my God, fuck me, he is in a bad, dark place in this film. He is no longer that kind of optimistic kind of pupil from the first movie. He has gone through the ringer and, again, screwed over left, right, and center, but he is using all the tools of his craft, all the ninja stuff that we know and love, while also picking up a few things from the general character from the first one in terms of playing the slow game in this film. He wants revenge, he wants to take him out, but obviously his position in terms of the person he wants to kill is really highly restrictive. So he's playing the long game in this one. He's basically going to do the manipulation. He's going to add whispers of his rise, of, in terms of his character, still being alive, and kind of threatening people and removing the head. And the film, very much like the first two movies, is playing, the politics game, essentially, this idea of kind of manipulation, where we're deceived, there's the position of power. I like the fact there is this kind of the wife and the kind of the second wife, and then the newborn child, and replacing the older son in terms of ruling the nation. And you've got this historical kind of almost school-based kind of story with our main kind of villain character wanting to invade China, I want to invade Korea, and he does this in the film. He basically goes to invade Korea. He wants ships, he wants supplies, he wants troops ready, and his mission is to go out there and invade another country. And that's shown in various kind of stages throughout the film in terms of its kind of success and eventual stalemate and kind of position by close to the end of the film. I definitely will agree in terms of some of the criticisms of the third film, and I will agree it's not as good as the first two, obviously. The style is not as here. It's very still to the camera, because it's not as interesting compared to the first two. It's not as big scale. It's definitely a lot of people talking. However, the first two movies were a lot of people talking as well, but you do get some action moments, and you do get some grand scale kind of invasion. And I think it's just the way this story is told in a much more interesting way. And this one, it's not as interesting compared to the first two. It definitely feels very different. It feels, again, it's a lot of characters in rooms talking about the situation, less than acting it out. Granted, though, there are some really good moments in the film, and I will disagree to some extent, because there are some definitely towards the third act of the film. And I like the fact that our main character is kind of infiltrating and basically kind of putting the squeeze with our main samurai characters, and I really like that. And the fact that the good chunk of the film, similar to part two and part one, actually thinking about it, is the politics that's going on behind the scenes. And he's a reserver. He's someone who is striking from the shadows, someone who's listening into those rumors, creating those rumors, and inserting himself in the right moments to create doubt, to create kind of conspiracy, and to create unease with the current political kind of agendas that's going on within the samurai world and kind of on current Japan. I can't get into all the technical names and all the kind of the correct pronunciations, because I'm just not the right person for that. But in terms of a film, in terms of an entertaining piece, in terms of a historical piece, I think it's a pretty good conclusion, a good third act trilogy, part three to the story. And his character is staying on true form. He wants that revenge, and he is patient. He's ruthless in some regards, and definitely has a lot of assistance from very interested parties that want to help him on this quest for their own kind of personal gain, of course. And the film concludes naturally to that revenge storyline, and it actually confirms the end at the end of it, which I think is definitely a stamp in terms of this side of the story, in terms of his kind of where the film goes and what he does by the end. Is it as satisfying as compared to the first two? No. Is the action as good as the first two? No, also. But I do think it's pretty well made. I think it's a very competent film, even though there are some pretty good little moments of action choreography and weaponry work with the hooks and the kind of the poison darts and things like that. Definitely sprinkled in the film. These films are not designed to be there. These are character-driven films, and if you invested in the material, if you like where the films are going, you're definitely going to be invested in this. I do think Part 3 is definitely a bit of a weaker entry compared to the first two, but definitely still worth watching, definitely still a good continuation and concluding chapter of the initial first three films at the time. So that's been my thoughts and opinions on Shinobi Part 3 Resurrection. What are your thoughts and impressions on the concluding chapter of the initial three films? What is your favorite out of the three? Does the sequels get better? Do they get worse? What more can they do with this character now? Where do they go in terms of the historical aspect? Love to know your thoughts and impressions. Are you a fan of these movies? Please comment down below. So meantime, guys, I'm for reviews. Signing out.